Steve, awesome to have you here. I'm really excited for this conversation. I've seen a lot of your stuff on LinkedIn already, so I know this is going to be a great one. Maybe you can tell the folks here who you are and what you do.
Yeah, hey Matt, pleasure to be here. My name's Steve Wade. I'm the founder of Platform Fix, and I'm the guy that companies call when their Kubernetes migration is 18 months in, 2 million over budget, and their platform team's falling apart. And I know exactly what that feels like because I was once that guy. So early on in my career, I led a platform transformation that was supposed to take 6 months. And 18 months later, we had about 70 plus microservices, 3 service meshes. Yes, 3 because we kept trying new ones and never actually finished migrating off the old ones. And then we had we had monitoring tools that needed their own monitoring, and then we had documentation for our own documentation, right? Um, and we had a team that had completely lost faith in the process. Like in this time, we had 2 senior engineers quit. And then the VP of engineering pulled me into a conference room and said, look, if you can't fix this in the next 90 days, we're starting over with a different team. And that was when my life kind of really changed. That failure changed everything moving forward, because in those 90 days I learned something that no one talks about at conferences, which is most platforms aren't solved by adding things, they're solved by deleting things. And moving on and rolling forward, we ended up deleting 48 of those 70 plus services. We deleted 3 of those 4 service meshes, and then we deleted monitoring systems, deployment tools, entire chunks of infrastructure. And then something kind of incredible happened. The deployment time went from 3 weeks to 3 days. The team stopped working weekends. 6 months later, one of the engineers came back, and that became the foundation of what I do now at Platform Fix. I've rescued over 50 platforms since then. I've saved companies north of 100 million in what I would call complexity waste. And where most consultants come in and add complexity, I come in and delete it. And I've started calling myself the pragmatic CNCF guy. And you've probably seen that around on LinkedIn. Because while everyone else is collecting the latest tools like Pokemon cards, I'm helping teams figure out which tools they can throw away. And I'm excited to dive into that today.
There's a lot for us to unpack there, and I'm super excited by this. Before we get into some of that you mentioned there, though, I'd love just to level set on the term or what platform engineering means to you. So both, what is a platform and what is platform engineering?
Yeah, so I think, I've rescued these 50 platform teams, but I think like really what are the challenges that organizations have like when they bring me in? So if we start with what platform engineering should be, and then I'll tell you what it's become, because I honestly think there's a huge gap, right?
Love it.
Platform engineering should be simple, right? The term, the definition, and what we do. We're building internal tools and platforms that make our developers' lives more productive. That's it, right? So here's my test. I say, can a developer who joined 2 weeks ago deploy a change to production without asking anyone for any help? If yes, I say you have a good platform. If no, you have what I call platform theater. But here's what's actually happening. Platform engineering has become an excuse for tool hoarding and resume or CV driven architectures.
That's really interesting. I mean, the CNCF landscape is kind of a bit of an open joke within the community, right? Like you bring that up and there's a plethora of tools there. And it can be quite daunting for people who are getting into this or new to it to sort of go there and try and figure things out, right? Like you look at just one of the sections, if you're trying to implement security scanning in your organization, you sort of go and look at that and you're inundated with many different tools that do many different things, and it can take months and months just to dig through that to figure out which ones are even just meeting your requirements, right?
Yeah, and I think the other problem is that this resume architecture that I'm talking about is everywhere, right? Let me tell you a story about a company that I worked with a couple of years ago. So they're a 200 person fintech, super smart people, some of the most intelligent people that I've ever had the pleasure of working with, very well funded, and they decided to do platform engineering right. Right, so they hired a senior platform engineer. For this episode, let's call him Mark.
Mm-hmm.
And Mark had worked at previous tech organizations, knew all the latest tools, had a super impressive GitHub profile. And then in Mark's first month, he proposed the platform architecture, right? So he had Kubernetes, obviously. He had Istio for service mesh, Argo CD for GitOps, Crossplane for infrastructure as code, Backstage for the developer portal, Vault for secrets, a full observability stack with Prometheus, Grafana, Loki, Tempo, and Jaeger. Right? Sounds super impressive. CTO looked at it and thought, well, this is what companies like Spotify use. So we should follow the industry best practices, right? Industry best practices is a trigger word for me. We can come on to that a little bit later. But they approved it. They said, yep, golden ticket, go ahead, build this platform. 18 months later, this migration had cost 2.3 million. They had 6 platform engineers that just kind of kept it running. They had developers that were still waiting 2 to 3 weeks for deployments, and the platform team working weekends to handle incidents. But here's the kicker. Mark had left for another company with lead platform Kubernetes migration now on his CV. And then when I came in, I asked one simple question. I said, what problem is Istio solving for you? Guess what the answer was?
They didn't know.
They said mutual TLS between services.
Okay.
So I said, okay, that's great, right? But that's like a 250K per year solution when you factor in all the operational costs of platform engineers that you've got that are trying to figure out what this tool does and how to debug it, right? To a problem that really another service mesh and network policies could solve for a fraction of that complexity. But Istio looked better on a CV. And that's really what CV-driven architecture is. It's tools that are chosen because they're impressive and they can impress the next platform engineer, not because they solve actual business problems.
Yeah, interesting. So with the organizations that you're working with who are in these sort of states and kind of need that simplification, what is it that you see when you go into these organizations, and how do you start some of those conversations and how do you know that they're having the challenges that you see quite often in the field here? Can you pretty quickly get to the point of understanding that things are just on fire and it's a bit of mayhem inside?
Yeah, so we can kind of talk through that, right? It's what I call the complexity crisis pattern. So week 0 or week 1, right, I get the company to describe what they deem as a modern platform, right, or how they do Kubernetes. And then, I talk them through what this process looks like. And they say, well, months 3 to 6, we built this really super impressive tech stack, looks amazing on architecture diagrams, uses all the coolest tools, gets all the likes on the engineering blog posts, right? And then they roll forward a couple more months. So now we're looking at, months 9 to 12 maybe on this. And then the cracks start to show, right? Deployments are taking longer than before the migration. Platform teams are spending 60% of their time on support tickets. Developers are complaining it's hard to ship features. And then everyone's working late to meet deadlines. And that's like the first year, right? Then you get to the next 6 months and you get senior engineers that are leaving, executives that are questioning the investment, platform teams that are completely burnt out. And then the company's velocity is kind of a standstill. And that's really when they call me, right? And then the first thing that I do is I say, look, we're going to do this simplicity test. And what is a simplicity test? Well, it's an 8-minute average, can take a little bit longer depending upon who's there, assessment that scores platform complexity from 0 to 50. And essentially, if you get 0 to 15, you're sustainable. I would say you don't really need to do anything. 16 to 25, manageable. That's kind of, where I would expect people to be. 26 to 35, that's what I'd call the warning. This needs attention soon, but not necessarily right now. And then if you score 36 to 50, you're in crisis mode. And that's where the rescue is required. And then most companies that I work with are between kind of 38 to 45.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, that's quite interesting, and I'll have to put some links certainly in the show notes to all of the resources that we'll talk about here. So, for folks that are listening or watching, make sure to check some of these out for some of the resources that Steve's got for us as well. You mentioned in there something I'd just like to unpack a little bit was around like the executives not wanting to continue, funding the project sort of thing. So do you think part of it is a little bit of a disconnect between the sponsors of the platform and those who are funding it and responsible for the budget and then those who are sort of like the platform engineers that are in the coalface, doing the work. Is there a bit of a disconnect there between what the platform should be delivering for the business, or what it's expected to deliver for the business, versus what it's actually doing on the day-to-day basis?
Sometimes the senior level executives want to do a platform or a transformation in air quotes, right? Where there's many ways that the word transformation can be framed, right? You could do a lift and shift migration just quickly to get something, off of your on-premise environment onto your cloud environment, or you could be completely what I would call replatforming. So you're going from VMs that may be using some kind of Ansible or Puppet or Chef to be able to deploy those workloads, and you want to move to a more cloud native Kubernetes centric implementation. But the problem is, and we'll come on to this later, is what I call tool tax, right? So there's an initial upfront understanding of what this amount of work would take, right? So we're going to lift and shift all of these microservices to Kubernetes, right? That's a relatively well trodden path of how to do that. It's when you start layering on more of the what I would call data operation stack, right? How do we enable and implement observability? What tools do we have available to us, right? Everyone goes to the shiny object syndrome. And what happens is a migration that was expected to take you 6 months ends up taking you 18 months because you haven't really thought about everything after what I would call day one, right? Or maybe you are thinking about it, but it's taking a lot longer than you thought about, right? So prime example is when people say, well, we're just going to implement, Prometheus and Grafana, and we'll just have observability done, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is that you have to expose metrics on your applications to really get business value metrics and alerts, right? CPU like usage is important. So is memory usage. So is disk usage, right? They're all super useful. But if you can't put those into business context, they're kind of meaningless, right?
Yep.
We want to know what's happening from a business or customer side, right? What's happening to checkout? CPU's going up. Okay, is checkout execution being throttled? Question. Right. And if we can't answer that question, it doesn't really matter how many of these shiny objects or dashboards or alerts we have at what I would call the lower level.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the problem. I think people don't think about the whole entire ecosystem when they're architecting and providing a roadmap. And I've seen it so many times, right? I've seen, well, we've got all of our microservices running in Kubernetes. We've got all of the GitOps. Everyone can deploy everything perfectly fine. And then you ask one simple business level question and you ask them to prove it, and it all just kind of crumbles like a house of cards. And it's because they're not doing that. They're not thinking like an executive would think. They're thinking like an engineer would think. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? We still have to be thinking like engineers. But really, we're doing this migration to solve business problems, and we have to put the business first when we do that.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I've found in my years working as an engineer, and it's something that I had to mature into, was trying to understand and learn what business requirements are, and then trying to translate that into the technical, right? Like you said, the example with metrics, like, is CPU going up? Yes. If it is, that's probably not great. But at the end of the day, what's the user experiencing? Can they still buy the thing? Can they still do the thing on your website or your system? If so, it's okay. Like, the high CPU might be something to look into, but over here, the business are happy with how things are going because things are still working well. So, yeah. You mentioned something there that I want to talk through. Oh, sorry, did I cut you off?
Yeah, I think you've hit on a valid point there, right? And it's really, we don't spend enough time as engineers thinking about our consumer or our customer. We do to some degree when we're building features, but we don't necessarily when we think about incidents, right? So prime example is what you just said, right? Your CPU can be absolutely pegged and maxed out, right? But it's only maxed out because your horizontal pod autoscaler in Kubernetes is scaling out more pods to be able to deal with the throughput of requests. But your request checkout time hasn't dropped. So actually it's doing exactly the job that it should be doing. And in the background, it's scaling up, right? So we haven't lost any revenue. Our SLOs haven't decreased. It's just the tool or the platform is doing what it needs to do. And it's just dealing with the throughput that it's being given.
Yeah, yep, Exactly right. You mentioned something in that last couple of sentences or the last few minutes that I want to unpack a little bit further. And I've seen you talk about this before as well, and you called it the new tool tax. And I'd love to get your opinion on what that is. I assume that's your term that you've sort of coined. So I'd love to unpack that just a little bit further as well.
Yeah, so I think the new tool tax is something that no one talks about when it comes to platform tooling, right? And it's when you add a new tool, and let's park open source tooling just for a second, but it still actually matters, right? When you add a new tool, you're not just paying the license fee, right? You're paying what I call the new tool tax, and the new tool tax is typically 3 to 5 times the license cost. And let me show you what I mean. So here's a real example. Company decides to add Vault for secret management. License cost 40K annually, assume. So that's what they budget for. They budget for 40K annually for their Vault secret management installation. And then here's what they actually paid. They had a learning tax,
Mhm.
45K. 3 platform engineers spend 2 weeks each learning Vault. They have to create the documentation. They have to train the development team. They have some internal tooling to integrate Vault with existing systems. They make inevitable mistakes and they have to rework it. All right, that's stage one. So that's what I call learning tax. Then you have what I call integration tax. In this example, that was about 28K. So CI/CD integration, Kubernetes operator integration, migrating existing secrets to Vault, building monitoring for Vault itself, creating runbooks. Then we move on to what I call operational tax. That's about 50K annually. On-call coverage for Vault, because Vault is core to their implementation. Quarterly upgrade cycles, support tickets from developers, incident response, security patching. They're all operational taxes that we have to deal with.
Mhm.
And then we have what I call opportunity tax, right? And in this example, I kind of think it's about 80K, right? So while your engineer is working on Vault, they aren't building the developer platform that would save 200 hours of development time per month. So the total first year cost is actually 243,000, but you budgeted 40,000. So that's like a 6x multiplier for one tool. And then when I audit platforms, I typically find about 15 to 30 tools that have this tax applied. And that's why a platform that should cost 500K annually is actually costing 2.5 million. So before you add any tool, I would ask, what's the fully loaded cost, including the new tool tax? And then ask, what can we delete to pay for this? Right. And then better yet, I would ask something along the lines of, could we solve this problem by deleting something instead of adding something new? And I'm not anti-tool, right? I'm anti-unnecessary tool. Platforms need tools, obviously, otherwise they're not going to become a platform. But the question is, which tools actually solve your problems? Because your platform should make 80% of tasks trivially easy and then allow the other 20% to be possible. See, like in my mind, over the 52 migrations that I've done previously, developers need to do a couple of things. They need to deploy a service, connect to a database, view the logs and metrics, manage secrets, and maybe create some kind of environments. And those 5 things should be absurdly simple, right? One command or a couple of pull requests. And then I have what I call the exotic stuff. So custom Kubernetes resources, advanced networking configurations, and they can be harder, and that's fine because that's that 20% of use cases. But here's my controversial take, right? Most companies should not be building their internal developer platforms from scratch. Like a proper internal developer platform requires like 4 to 6 full-time engineers just to maintain once it's built. And then the question that you have to ask yourself is, do you have 4 to 6 engineers you can dedicate to this platform maintenance? Because
Mm.
most companies don't, right? And I think like when you should build a custom one is when you're Netflix scale with Netflix specific needs, right? You have a dedicated platform capacity and that it's truly your differentiator. And then when to buy, I would say when you're less than that, when commercial solutions do exist that meet those 80% fit of the requirements that you want, and your platform team is already underwater.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It reminds me of a good old Reddit thread I saw not too long ago, actually. And I'm not hammering on Backstage at all here, but there was someone who was asking about implementing Backstage in their environment, and I think that the number was I think that they had in the 30s of developers, like it was 31 or 32, and everyone responding to it was like, "Do not go down that path." Go into GitHub, create some templates, create some great documentation, use the tools that are available at your disposal already, and work them into becoming your platform. Leverage those tools, use those vendors that you've got already, and try and add your business value on top of those tools that your developers need to achieve the tasks that they need, the things that you just mentioned there.
Exactly, right. And I wrote a post recently on LinkedIn that was a little bit of a rant post, so apologies if you if you read it. But it went viral, right, which was unexpected. But I've ripped Backstage out of 3 customers before, right? And we don't need, if you need dedicated resources to be managing Backstage, that in itself is a problem, right? Developers know where to go and look for things. They go to GitHub, they have pinned README files, right, or links to the repository's README. If we just did kind of, rather than CV driven development, if we did README driven development and actually had good quality READMEs and well trodden paths and good documentation that allowed developers to understand how to do that 80% of what they required, in my mind, you don't really need Backstage, right? You can clone the template, like you said, the repository template. You read the README. It walks you through the flow of things to do, and alas, there you go. You're up and running, and you've got your next microservice.
Yeah. So, do you think that there's in the organizations that you get brought into, and with the ones that you've worked with, do you find that there's a little bit of a disconnect between like the platform teams and the platform engineers with what they're trying to build and the consumers of the platform, the developers themselves? Or do you find that they're usually quite well integrated and sort of know what the other one wants, but just are struggling to find the time to get there and build what the devs need?
I think it's a mixture of both. So you can be in 2 camps. I think you can be in the, we have a target on our back to be able to migrate to, a cloud native platform within a given amount of time. So what we're going to do is we're going to build it and they will come, right? That never works. But
Mhm.
platform engineers or platform team work as hard and as credibly hard as they can to build the platform, to have all the platform tooling that they want. And then they give the developers the golden path because it's the only path, right? And they say, follow this and you'll land in our, our utopian world of cloud native Kubernetes clustering, and everything will just work perfectly fine. That's not really how it should work, but that is one camp. The other camp is the platform engineers work hand in hand with the developers, and there is an understanding at the organizational level that this will take slightly longer to implement, but everyone will be much, much happier at the end. And the
Mhm.
key business level deliverables will be executed. Speed of deployment will go up, right? Developer happiness will go up. Touch points with platform engineering will decrease, right? Platform engineers will be solving platform level problems, not developer level problems. But I think it depends upon which camp your organization sits in. Depends upon how successful what I would call a platform migration or even leveraging an existing platform is. Really, the platform engineers' customers are the developers, right?
Mhm.
So if they don't involve the customer, e.g., the developer at the beginning, they're not going to get anywhere, right? And we always talk in application development. We do user research. We talk to our customers. We understand what our customers want. When's the last time your platform engineers went and talked to developers? I guarantee you it's in the months of time. And it's because we don't regularly go there, collect feedback, and iterate. Right. And the successful platform teams that I've worked with in the past, we have what we call a platform retrospective, and we have it every month. And it's essentially all of the engineers or a set of engineers come to this meeting and they basically unload on the platform team. Right? They say, "This is crap. This doesn't work properly. It would be really good if we keep getting stuck on this problem."
Mhm.
Right? And then your roadmap directly correlates to the the customer's success. So you have your own roadmap, but you also scatter in these developer improvements along the way. And then the developers are happy because they can see they're being listened to. The platform naturally gets better, and then the platform engineers go back to doing platform engineering, and then everyone else is happier, right? But I've been in organizations before, and I get called in, and it's like, so I go through this questionnaire, and I say, when was the last time that you spoke directly to an engineer, right? And they say X amount of months or whatever. And then I say, if you were an engineer, how well, on a scale of 1 to 5, would you rate the platform that they're leveraging?
Mm-hmm.
And what's great is I ask the same question to the engineers, and then I basically put the two data sets in front of each other, and I say, look how drastically off you are. You think you've built a utopian world, and you've actually built them a Faraday cage.
Yeah, that's interesting. We had we've got a pulse report that we released recently here at Octopus, and it was looking at platform engineers and getting some data from them out in the field, and it was quite interesting to see the success of a platform through the eyes of the platform engineering team or the producers of the platform, and then the consumers of the platform, and then sort of mix that with, is the platform mandatory or is it optional? Can devs choose to use the platform, or do they need to? And there were some quite interesting results that we had there. And it's, you've touched on something there that I had a conversation with Luke Phillips for episode 1 of Inside Platform Engineering, and a lot of it surrounded a lot of it was centered on the fact that we need to communicate with our developers as platform engineers, right? And I understand that not everyone who's in platform engineering will want to be doing that, but I think that's where the champions sort of maybe need to evolve. If you're not large enough to have like a product manager dedicated to the platform itself, which I find is usually in quite large organizations before you're going to get to that phase where you've got someone who's got, the company can invest in a full-time product manager for the internal platform. That's probably quite at a large scale. So before you get there, I feel like there's 1 or 2 champions on the platform team that sort of need to take that lead, right, and have the space as well from leadership to be able to run sessions and go out and gather feedback and talk to the developers. And like you said, just let them sort of unload and then start to hear common themes. Is it, our infrastructure is really hard for the devs to spin up, and they're submitting a lot of tickets to us. So, if we can spend 2 or 3 weeks really refining that process and making it, a sort of a 1-click or a 1-command automation for them, then, that is enabling them, like you said, making developers happy, and it's, going to lead to the success of the platform, right?
Agreed. It's the human cost, right? So let me paint this picture for you of, we talked about the complexity score. I'm going to give you a story where the complexity score was 42 out of 50, right? And I worked with this company a couple of years ago. To give some understanding of where they were, they had 350 employees, right? And when I walked into their office for the kickoff meeting, the VP of engineering, and we'll call her Sarah for this, it's not her actual name, she looked completely exhausted, right? And she said, I need you to understand something. This isn't just a technical problem anymore. This is a people problem.
Mm-hmm.
And then she said 3 months earlier that 2 of her senior platform engineers gave notice on the same day. And then when she did the exit interviews with them, they both pretty much said exactly the same thing, right? I'm tired of fighting the platform. I just want to build products, right? And then one of them specifically said, I haven't had dinner with my kids, on a weekday for like 6 months. And because I'm always either on call or fixing some incident, and that just isn't sustainable. And then the week before I joined, her best developer came to her and said, I've got an offer with another company, but I don't want to leave. But they're shipping features every couple of days, and we're sat here shipping features every couple of weeks. And I'm feeling like I'm not growing anymore. And then she said, like, we're losing our best people. And it's not because of salary, it's because of the platform and the product that we've built. And it was really because the platform is so complicated that the people here are miserable working with it, right? And like, we looked at the numbers, and the deployment time was around 17 days, kind of average, from code completion to production. And then the platform team was doing around I think it was 65 to 68% of their time answering developer questions, right? And then their on call was 4 to 6, times per night for the platform team. And then their overall morale score, which I think if anyone's not doing morale scores in their organization, I highly, highly recommend that you should do them regularly, because it's actually quite revealing. Their morale score was 3.2 out of 10. But
Wow. Yeah.
when I interviewed the developers, they said they said something that like is ingrained in my memory. They said when the platform team is working incredibly hard, right? They're not bad engineers. They've just built a platform so complicated that only they can understand it, but they don't use the platform. We do. And I think that's the real cost of complexity, right? It's not just a number. It's time, and it's human cost. Like the real cost to me is human toil, right? You've got burnt out platform engineers, you've got frustrated developers, you've got families not seeing their parents, you've got career progression stalled, because everyone's trying to keep the lights on.
Yeah.
And that's why I do this work, right? Not because simplification is just like technically elegant. It's because
Mm.
it gives people their lives back.
Yeah, yep. I've seen many people. It's a common theme in our industry, just in general. Burnout and trying to be aware of it, right? And we've sort of, as an industry, gone and put this on ourselves a little bit. We've gone and worked ourselves into a hole almost, and it's sometimes hard to identify when you're in that position, and it's not sometimes until too late that you can sort of recognize it within yourself that you are quite burnt out and things aren't going so well. And like you said, it affects everything, right? We're humans, right? We can't just switch off at the end of a work day, or like you said, a lot of platform engineers are on call, so they literally can't switch off. But yeah, no, so that's really great. I want to come back to something that we've touched on a few times as well, which is what you mentioned around the deletion protocol. And I'd love if you're able to just talk through that a little bit more, but also for our listeners, is there something that they can look for within their own platforms, or what advice would you have for them in evaluating their own platforms right now and looking for maybe some waste or some things that they can look to remove from their platform? What questions should they be asking themselves?
Yeah, so I'm going to take Sarah's story and I'm going to kind of unpack it because I think it will make a lot more sense, and I will eventually get to deletion protocol. So
Hmm.
she had, a complexity score 42 out of 50, right? That's what we call crisis mode. And I told her team, I remember around the boardroom, I said, we're going to do something that's going to feel so counterintuitive. For the next 30 days, we're not building anything. We're just going to delete things. Right. And I could see the skepticism on people's faces. I remember the senior engineer said, Steve, that's great, but we've invested all this money. Like, why are we going to throw this all away? Right. And I said, the work's already gone. Right. It's costing you now. The question is, do you want to keep paying for it? So we went on these stages, right? So stage one, or week one, was what we did we did an audit. Right. So we spent week one just looking at what they had, not what they thought they had, what that was actually running, right? And those two are drastically different things. So they had 47 different tools in their platform stack. They had 23 microservices. They had 3 monitoring solutions. They had Datadog, Prometheus, and New Relic. Nobody could tell me why they had those 3, but they had those 3 anyway. They had 2 service meshes, right? They started with Linkerd, they moved to Istio, they got halfway through, and both were still running. Right? They had 17 databases. And when I asked them what 9 of them were for, no one knew. And then I told them that they had 0 connections in 30 days. Right? And the platform team didn't even know half this stuff existed, right? Because they built a self-service platform for developers that allowed developers to do some of these things themselves. So it was just running, right? It was costing money, creating complexity, but required ongoing maintenance. And then week 2 is what I call the categorization. So we put all of these tools into 4 buckets. Essential, so that's business critical, no alternative, have to keep it, no questions asked.
Mm.
Redundant, duplicate something else, right? We could delete that immediately. Over engineered, solves real problems, but probably too complicated, and we need to simplify it. Or the fourth one that people don't think about enough, premature, right? It's built for future scale that they don't have. Like, just delete it. And then the results is that we had 12 tools in essential, 19 tools in redundant, 11 tools in over-engineered, and 5 tools in premature. So that really means, if you do the math, that 35 of their 47 tools could be either deleted or simplified. And Sarah looked at me and she said, like, you're telling me that we're paying to maintain 35 tools that we don't actually need? I said, yes. And it's costing you about 85 grand a month, right? Plus the human cost that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Right. So now we have the data. You can't really argue with data, right? So next comes the second stage, which is what we called the deletion sprint, right? So we started with these easy wins. We went straight to redundant tools. First thing, deleted New Relic, right? They had Datadog and they had Prometheus. New Relic was just like there. So cost saving about 30 grand annually immediately. Time to delete about 3 hours. Impact, nobody even knew it was gone because no one was using it. Then we did deletion number 2. We got rid of those 9 mystery databases that had 0 connections in 30 days. All right. We sent an email out to everybody. We're going to delete these in 2 weeks if nobody needs them. Responses, 0, because no one was using them anyway. Deleted them, no one noticed.
Yep. Do the good old scream test. Delete it or turn it off and see what happens.
Exactly.
Yep.
And then the harder one was deletion number 3, right? This was this half-finished Istio migration. So why did we tackle that third? Well, it was kind of solving a problem that they didn't have, right? They thought they needed this advanced traffic routing. Well, they didn't, because their application couldn't handle advanced traffic routed. So we just reverted them back to Linkerd. Simpler, solved the actual needs that they wanted. Result, 60% reduction in service mesh complexity immediately. Time saved, about 10 hours a week for platform team maintenance and helping developers create different Istio configuration. So by the end of week 4, we'd deleted 19 redundant tools. We'd got rid of 6 over-engineered tools, and their complexity score after we rerun it had dropped from 42 to 26. So they'd gone from crisis to manageable. And then their monthly cost savings had dropped from about 150k to about 80k. So that was an annual cost saving of about 800k. But one of the developers came up to me during, the 3rd and 4th week, and they said, Steve, I went home at 6 p.m. yesterday. Like, that's the first time in 8 months. And my daughter said, like, Daddy, you're home. And that's when it really hit me, right? That's what we're really working towards. So that's really the power of what I call strategic deletion. And this kind of comes onto the methodology. So this process is completely repeatable. And that story that I've told you, I've done it over 40 to 50 times, right? And after about 20, I realized I was following the same pattern every time. So, like any good engineer, we document it, we test it, and then we refine it and make it slightly better. And that's what I call the deletion protocol. And it's really built on 3 top-level principles. Principle number 1, measure before you delete, right? You can't delete what you can't see. And most platform teams have absolutely no idea what's actually running in their infrastructure. They know the big things, Kubernetes, the database, the CI/CD system. But there's all this other stuff. I call them experiments that become permanent, right? Tools someone installed just to try 3 years ago. Infrastructure for features they never launched, right? And that's why we start with that complexity test that I was talking about before. And the complexity scoring I mentioned earlier, we score 10 different dimensions. So tool sprawl, development complexity, cognitive load, operational burden, documentation debt, knowledge silos, incident frequency, time to production, self-service capability, and finally team satisfaction. And each dimension gets 0 out of 5 points, right? So the total score is either 0 or 50 if you hit all the maximum of them. And anyone listening can take this assessment right now. Just reach out to me, steve@platformfix.com. It takes around 8 to 10 minutes, and you'll immediately see where your complexity problems are. So far, over 400 platform engineers have taken this. the average score is around 34, which is kind of warning territory. If you score above 35, you need to act. So that's principle number one. Principle number two is what I call delete in order. So you can't delete everything at once, right? Even if we wanted to. So there's an order to deletion. And we use what I call the deletion priority matrix. So for each tool, ask, what is the impact of deleting this? Essentially, how much complexity does it remove? What's the risk of deleting this? What breaks if we remove it? And then you start with high impact, low risk deletions, right? So redundant tools nobody uses, you can delete them immediately. Abandoned experiments, you can delete them immediately. Duplicated monitoring systems, well, you can delete them immediately as well. But then you end with high impact, high risk. So core service mesh simplification. That requires a careful migration plan. And if you get that wrong, you can have a horrific incident. CI/CD system replacement. Maybe you had a custom solution and you're going to something like GitHub Actions or GitLab, right? That needs a staged rollout. You're not going to do that in one big bang release. And then database consolidation. There's a data migration that's required for that. And that company with Sarah, we deleted about I think it was 18 or 19 things in the first 2 weeks because they were high impact, low risk. The Istio to Linkerd simplification took 6 weeks, right? Because it was high risk and required careful migration. But we still did it because the impact was worth the effort. So that's principle 2. Principle 3, again, is what we came onto before, which was called the new tool tax. I'm not going to go over that again. And they're really the three levels to go through.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. And do you operationally moving forward when you've sort of come in and helped these organizations, do you leave them or do you stay engaged moving forward, or is it too soon to tell, 6, 12, 18 months on? Or do you leave them with some things, or have they learned some things that they can start to internally assess themselves with, using some of the lessons that you've given them? Do they, do you tell them to stop and reflect every couple of months on, on the platform, really question some of the tooling that's in here? Is it adding business value? All that sort of stuff?
Yeah, so there's a number of kind of engagement models that we go with. But really it's about, I want to teach you the patterns, paradigms, systems, and frameworks to allow you to do this effectively moving forward, right? There's an initial, let's fix the problem and get it to a solution which is stable. But there's also this, we're great at repeating the mistakes that we've made in the past, right? We're all human. I do it hundreds and hundreds of times. So what patterns and practices do we put in place to make sure that we don't do this problem again? Right? And I think that's more important. So how do I teach you and train you to make sure that when you're looking at a tool, how do you select it? How do you know, we talked earlier before, right, about the CNCF landscape. There's a plethora of tools for almost everything that you want to do. How do you decide which tool is best for you? And then there's another framework for that. And we talk about, how do we do tool selection, not just for now, but for now plus insert period of time that we care about. Too many people choose tools because they think they've got a problem tomorrow, right? Oh, this tool does all of these things, 15 things. We only need 2 of them, but you never know, because in 18 months or 2 years, we may need to do these other things, right? But then what's the operational burden and complexity and new tool tax that you have on selecting that tool? So really it's a phased approach of, we'll come in and we'll help you fix the immediate problems, and we'll get your complexity score down to something that's manageable. We'll teach you and train you on the patterns and techniques that we've used over the last 52 migrations to make sure that you don't make mistakes moving forward. And then sometimes we get on weekly or monthly or quarterly calls and we do reviews of what they currently have added, or they're not sure whether they should be adding this tool, and they say, Steve, can you jump on a quick call? We want you to evaluate the tool choice that we're having. And then I say, have you gone through the framework? Please provide me the data, and then I'll come and join the call with you, and I'll give you my decision. And then sometimes it's an ongoing support call after that, or we hold, maybe they want some platform engineering, guidance, and assistance.
Yeah, awesome. I love that education's a big part of it because a lot of this stuff, and this is just my opinion, of course, but I find a lot of this stuff in our industry is just a lot of you don't know what you don't know, right? And a lot of that comes with time and experience and, living through these things and seeing other people and colleagues and, peers in the industry. But there's just this factor of, yeah, you don't know what you don't know. And so I love that there's an education element to it to enable people to be able to take on these things themselves, right? And would you have any advice for folks out there around just sort of keeping up with the industry and platform engineering in general?
Yeah, so it's funny you should say that because I get asked that question a lot, and my answer is always a little bit controversial. Don't. So the CNCF landscape is moving at a pace that is almost absurdly complicated and
Mhm.
impossible to be able to keep up with. So I always say, we talk about Y-shaped and T-shaped people, right? So have a good understanding in one specific area. Maybe you're the GitOps expert or you're the observability expert, but have the ability to be able to understand other areas, but most importantly, when you need to understand them, right? It's impossible to be an expert in the whole of platform engineering, because it's just so vast, right? So focus on one specific area, and then everyone is, intelligent. There's so much information out there. There's people that you can talk to in the industry. There's conferences, etc., etc., and use those to your advantage when you need to go and learn something new.
Yeah, yep, I like that. I find it's a double-edged sword of the social online environment that we live in these days. I've got some mates who are in the industry, and every now and then we'll bring up that you open up LinkedIn or something like that, and you sort of scroll for a little bit, and then you feel so left behind because you've seen all these people talking about the new flashy stuff and everything cool that's going on out there. And it's kind of like I remind my kids about social media is like people put on there what they want you to see. So just, take that with a grain of salt as well. So,
Yeah, and there's a story that resonates with me that I remember from a customer of ours, which was, I worked with this customer and they spent 18 months building a deployment system. I'm not going to name the tools. They are CNCF tools. They're very well known. They'd implemented this super solution, right? Cost of engineering 850K, right, in engineering time. The,
mhm.
the result, unfortunately, was they built something that worked about 80 to 90% as well as GitHub Actions, right?
Wow. Yep.
So we just migrated them to GitHub Actions. Cost, maybe 40K. Ongoing maintenance, zero, because it's handled by GitHub, right? And you once you start to think about these things, you end up using tools that reduce tool tax, not increase them, because you need to choose simplification over impression, right? I always state this quote, and people that I know are going to have heard me say this before, which is choose boring technology that works, right? Because boring is beautiful, especially at 3 a.m. on an incident, right?
That's right. Yep.
And your platform's power doesn't come from what you add, right? It comes from what you have the courage to delete.
Amazing. Yeah, I love it. There's a lot of key takeaways here, I think. And as we start to wrap things up, I'd love if you've got, I'm going to put you on the spot here, but if you've got one key takeaway for viewers and listeners from this discussion that someone could take away with them, what would that be?
Don't chase the shiny objects. Think about the business value and the complexity score that you're going to have from implementing that tool. That tool may look great from the outside. It may offer you all the bells and whistles, right? But when you install it, you've got a flight simulator that you're having to deal with, when actually you may just want an on-off switch.
There you go. I love it. Steve, this has been an excellent conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I already know that I'm going to have to get you back on the show because we've got so many other pockets of platform engineering that we haven't even touched on today that I know that you'll have knowledge and expertise in. So I'd love to get you back on at some point in time. But for now, do you want to let folks know where to find you online if they want to reach out and connect and see some of the stuff that they're doing? And also, if you've got anything to plug, go for gold. The floor is yours now.
Yeah, so I just want to say, it's been great. Thanks for having me on. Like, if anything that anyone has heard that I talked about resonated, here's what I'd love you to do. I want you to first take the simplicity test. Reach out to me, steve@platformfix.com. I'll send you that. It's 8 minutes. It's free. There's no sales call required, and you'll get your score from 0 to 50 with some specific recommendations based on where you are. That's the first thing, right? The second thing I want you to do is I want you to do what I call the Monday morning deletion. So next Monday, I want you to pick one tool in your platform that you suspect no one's using. Check the logs, check the metrics. If it hasn't been used in 60 days, announce you're deprecating it in 2 weeks. And here's what will happen. No one will respond. Delete it. Celebrate the win with your team. And then you'll be shocked how much you can delete when you start actually measuring usage. Third thing, connect with me on LinkedIn. Just search Steve Wade Platform Fix. I post every day about platform simplification, deletion strategies, real rescue stories that get pretty regularly. And then send me a connection request and mention that you heard this podcast. I'm always interested in connecting with people who are serious about simplification. I share frameworks, diagnostic tools, and lessons from the field. But here's what I want you to imagine, right? Imagine your platform team going home at 6 p.m. Imagine your developers deploying changes in hours instead of weeks. Imagine your on-call pager staying silent. And then imagine your best engineers staying instead of leaving. And this is not a fantasy. That's what happens when you choose simplicity over complexity. That's what happens when you master the art of deletion, because your platform doesn't have to be complex. You have a choice. Choose deletion, choose simplicity, choose giving your team their lives back. Thanks again for having me, and this was fantastic.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Steve. I've really enjoyed the conversation. And like I said before, I'll put any and all links down below in the description of this as well that Steve has sent me already. So if you want to find Steve online, the links will be there. But as he said, search for Steve Wade Platform Fix on LinkedIn as well. So thanks again for joining me, Steve. And we will do it again soon.
Pleasure. Thanks, Matt.